When the movie The Amityville Horror hit theaters in 1979, audiences saw a sinister story about a haunted house and a family tormented by invisible forces. What few knew at the time, and many still ignore, is that the script was based on documented events that occurred just a few years earlier in a 3-story colonial house located at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. Hollywood, for its part, turned it into entertainment, but behind the scenes, there was an uncomfortable silence about the details that were intentionally left out. Before it became fiction, Amityville was the scene of a crime that froze America. 6 people were murdered, without resistance, in their sleep in a single night. Less than a year later, another family moved into that house and fled from it, abandoning everything. They never returned. Records, investigations, and even photographs suggest that what happened there may never have been just a common tragedy. But in the end, what really inhabits that house that fiction didn't dare to show? Welcome to another night, where the mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to show the videos to more people, and for me to keep bringing you this content. I'm counting on you. Let's dive into the video. Imagine waking up on an ordinary morning in a quiet town and finding out that an entire house was silenced overnight. Not by a fire, not by an accident, but by a massacre. That's what happened in Amityville on November 13th, 1974. The DeFeo family's house, located on Ocean Avenue, was the scene of something so strange, so meticulously silent, that to this day no one has been able to explain it. Ronald DeFeo Jr., just 23 years old, murdered his father, mother, and 4 siblings with a hunting rifle, all while they slept, all lying face down, all without any sign of struggle. The weapon, a Marlin .35, was absurdly loud. Any shot inside that house should have echoed through the walls and alerted the other family members. But no one moved. Not even the neighbors heard anything. The crime scene looked more like a ritual than an impulsive act of violence. The bodies were aligned, covered, in a space without mess, without chaos, without resistance. Investigators found no trace of drugs or sedatives in the victim's blood. None. So what stopped all of them from waking up? DeFeo ran to a nearby bar the next morning, claiming that his family had been executed. But his story fell apart within hours. He first blamed mobsters, then admitted to the crime, saying voices in the house had told him to do it. The coldness with which he spoke, and the constant changes in his story, made it clear that something more was behind that slaughter. It wasn't just a breakdown. It was as if he had been guided. At the trial, the defense tried to plead insanity. They brought up his drug use, the troubled relationship with his father, signs of mental disorders. But none of that explained what most haunted the investigators. How could 6 people be killed in sequence with deafening gunshots, without a single scream, a single sign of alarm? The victims died where they slept, as if they were already expecting it. And then the whispers began. Old stories about the land. Rumors of strange practices in the area. People who said they felt an unsettling presence when passing in front of the house, even before the murders. The police, of course, couldn't officially consider this. But outside the reports, between one coffee and another at the station, the officers themselves admitted that house had something they couldn't name. From then on, the focus shifted. From Ronald to the place. The name Amityville began to carry weight, circulating in newspapers and TV shows. The crime, though legally solved, remained surrounded by doubts. No motive presented seemed sufficient. No scientific explanation resolved the most disturbing detail, the silence of the house that night. A silence that didn't match the gunshots. A silence almost complicit. Over the years, Ronald gave interviews saying that his sister was also involved. In others, that he didn't remember anything. In some, he denied everything. It was as if he himself was trapped inside overlapping versions of a truth he could never fully tell. And with each new contradiction, the feeling grew. What happened there that night wasn't just a crime. It was the opening of a door. He died in 2021, still in prison. He never asked for forgiveness. He never explained himself. And the house, it remained empty, waiting. At first glance, it looked just like another American home, with a charming facade and well-kept yard. But for those who knew what had happened inside, it was never just a house again. It was a reminder that sometimes evil doesn't need noise, just silence. And it was within that silence, still pulsing in the walls, that a new family crossed the gate of Ocean Avenue, believing they were starting a new life. They had 28 days to discover the mistake they had made. When George and Kathy Lutz visited the house on Ocean Avenue, they were told the full story. The realtor didn't hide anything. An entire family had been murdered inside less than a year earlier. Even so, they accepted. The price was low, the structure was impressive, and with 3 small children, it seemed like the right place to start over. What no one imagined was that, by crossing that door, they weren't just entering a new home, they were awakening something that had never slept. The first days were strange, but nothing that stood out immediately. A sour smell coming from the upstairs, a room colder than the rest of the house, windows that seemed to jam on their own. George, practical and rational, attributed everything to the old structure. But as the days went by, things stopped being simple. Because one thing is a creaky door, another is it slamming shut by itself at 3 in the morning. George changed. He stopped eating. He would stand for hours staring at the fireplace. It wasn't sleep. It was something else. An obsession. He woke up exactly at 3:15 a.m. every night, without an alarm, without a reason. The same time Ronald DeFeo killed his family. But George didn't know that yet. Kathy, on the other hand, began to feel presences. She would wake up with marks on her body, had nightmares of people being murdered in the house, and when she described the rooms in those dreams, they matched exactly how they were at the time of the crime. The children started behaving differently. The youngest son said he spoke to someone named Jody, a pig with red eyes that appeared in the dark. The oldest daughter drew the house in flames. Things started to add up. Nothing shocking on its own, but together it was suffocating. The Lutzes began to argue. The tension grew, and what once seemed like coincidence began to form a pattern. It was always in the middle of the night, always in the same room, always with the same sensation. Someone or something was watching. They called a priest to bless the house. He came in, but he didn't finish. According to his own account, a deep male voice told him, "Get out." The presence was suffocating. The priest never came back. George tried calling him several times without any answer. With each attempt to resist, the house seemed to react. It was as if it knew they were trying to expel something, and it didn't like it. The manifestations intensified. Slime oozed from the walls. One room became infested with flies in the winter. George claimed he felt something inside him. Kathy, one night, levitated from the bed. The children screamed without knowing why. And always at 3:15 a.m., the house woke up. Objects moved, doors slammed, and the feeling was clear. They were being pushed out. But why? What did that house want? And then came the last night. They never said exactly what happened that evening. They only said it was enough to make them flee, leaving everything behind: clothes, documents, belongings. They left as if escaping a fire. But what did they see inside? What could make a family abandon their home and never return, not even to retrieve a photo album? The following weeks were filled with interviews, exams, sessions with psychics, and even hypnosis. Nothing contradicted what they had told. The story was the same, coming from every family member. And no matter how many skeptics emerged, George and Kathy never went back on their word. Never. Not even when the story was bought to be turned into a movie. They took part, but didn't romanticize. The fear they felt was real. Over time, the question stopped being about what happened to the Lutzes. The question became something else. What exists inside that house that turns any attempt at life into despair? What makes a house not age, but rot? Because in Amityville, time doesn't seem to erase anything. It just waits. After the Lutzes abandoned the house in Amityville, their story hit the newspapers, radio shows, and eventually became a topic of casual conversation. But not everyone was interested in controversy. Some saw something much more serious. And that's why Ed and Lorraine Warren decided to intervene. They weren't thrill seekers. They were paranormal investigators, respected by some, dismissed by others, but always called when fear surpassed logic. And according to the Lutzes, that was exactly what was happening there. When the Warrens arrived at Ocean Avenue, there were no furnishings, no signs of the previous family. But the air still felt heavy. Lorraine, a clairvoyant, stopped at the entrance. She said there was a dark presence there, something that didn't want to be named. She didn't speak with drama. She spoke with caution. like someone who recognizes a hostile environment before even stepping in. And when she crossed the threshold, she realized they weren't facing an ordinary house. They were facing something that stared back. The team accompanying the Warrens set up cameras and sensors all over the house. They wanted data. They wanted answers. And it was one of those cameras, placed in the upstairs hallway, that captured what would become one of the most unsettling images ever taken during a paranormal investigation. What appeared to be a boy with glowing eyes, staring down the hallway from inside a room. No children were in the house at that moment. None. The photograph spread. It was examined by experts, questioned by skeptics, but never clearly explained. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't an edit. It wasn't a shadow. It was someone or something standing there, watching. And if that weren't enough, the equipment began reacting. Temperature fluctuations, energy spikes, sounds without sources, knocks coming from empty rooms, and at certain moments, a silence so heavy it made the house feel aware. During the sweep, one of the investigators entered a room alone. Minutes later, he came out pale in shock. He said he felt a force pushing against his chest, as if he were being expelled. Others reported headaches, dizziness, nausea. Lorraine stated that this wasn't an ordinary spirit. It was something older, more ancient, and more intelligent. And according to her, it wasn't just in the house. The house was part of it. Ed, in turn, was categorical. The site had been corrupted. Perhaps by some ritual, perhaps by something that would never be fully understood. The suspicion was that the land had been used centuries earlier for spiritual exclusion ceremonies by indigenous tribes, not as a sacred place, but as a dumping ground. A place to leave what should no longer walk among the living. And if that past was forgotten, the house seemed to have taken it upon itself to remember. The manifestations continued while they were there. Dragging sounds came from the basement. Doors slammed on their own. Lorraine refused to enter certain rooms after the first night. She said that in one of them, there was something kneeling, as if waiting, but not in human form. No recording captured it, but her expression as she described it was that of someone who no longer needed proof. Invited mediums reported the same sensations, even without consulting one another. They all mentioned a void that followed them out of the house, as if it wasn't confined to the walls, as if it could follow whoever entered. That was the real threat, not just what lived there, but what could leave with you. At the end of the investigation, Ed and Lorraine didn't recommend an exorcism. They recommended distance. To them, the evil present there wasn't manifesting, it was studying, waiting. And every visit, every camera, every voice trying to understand, it was just another invitation for it to remain active. And so, the question stopped being about a haunting. It stopped being about what the Lutzes experienced. The question now was, what happens when a house learns from the fear of the people who enter it? With the name Amityville splashed across newspapers, magazines, and TV shows, it didn't take long for doubts to arise. Many people began to wonder, what if it was all just a well-told story? A profitable hoax disguised as tragedy? After all, the Lutzes sold the rights to their account, gave interviews, and allowed the case to be turned into a movie. That alone was enough to spark suspicion. What if they had made it all up? The fraud theory gained momentum when Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s lawyer, William Weber, claimed he helped the Lutzes create the paranormal narrative. According to him, the idea was to capitalize on the massacre's notoriety and profit from a book. But what's curious is that this same claim came after a legal dispute between him and the couple. Before that, Weber was one of the voices that supported the terror the family had endured. Did he change his mind, or just change sides? The Lutzes, for their part, never went back on their story. George, until the end of his life, repeated that they weren't trying to convince anyone, just trying to forget. They never set foot in the house again. They never sold different versions. And they never, at any point, contradicted themselves publicly. The account, from beginning to end, remained the same. And that led many to reconsider the idea that it had all been fabricated. Even stranger were the things that happened to some of the people who tried to debunk the story. William Weber himself faced legal troubles and personal crises after the exposure. Other skeptics who publicly mocked the case suffered unexplained accidents, sudden health problems, or simply vanished from the media. Coincidence? Maybe. But when coincidences pile up, even the most skeptical begin to hesitate. Paranormal scholars pointed out that if it were a hoax, it would be the most well-supported one in history. Because no other invention, has withstood so many decades of analysis, criticism, and investigation without a single piece of concrete evidence proving it false. No recordings disproved. No testimonies refuted. No contradictory evidence. Everything to this day remains consistent. And it didn't stop there. Investigator Stephen Kaplan, known for exposing paranormal frauds, tried to dig deep into the case. He claimed to have found inconsistencies, but died suddenly before publishing any material. What did he discover? We'll never know. The documentation was never found. The files disappeared. Another coincidence? At the same time, residents who lived in the house after the Lutzes denied any supernatural events. They claimed nothing strange happened. But reporters who interviewed these residents noted that they rarely stayed in the house for more than 2 years. They changed the subject easily, and some asked not to be identified. If nothing happened, why the discomfort in talking about it? Perhaps the problem wasn't proving what the Lutzes experienced, but accepting that they experienced it. Because accepting that a house can react to its residents, learn from them, and manipulate their perception is to open a door that most prefer to keep locked. And when something can't be explained, it's easier to call it a lie. But what do you do when the lie never fades? When instead of disappearing over time, it grows stronger? The Amityville case has resisted every attempt to erase it. And maybe that says more than any piece of evidence. Because even without consensus, no one can forget. And what if this insistence on discrediting the story is, in fact, just another way of protecting ourselves from what it really represents? As the years passed, the noise surrounding the house began to fade. Not because the case was forgotten, but because it became too uncomfortable to keep in the spotlight. The house on Ocean Avenue stopped being the focus of investigations and headlines and began to be treated as a problem to manage. It was renovated, painted, surrounded by tall fences. They even changed the street number. But none of those changes could erase what it had already been. Because when a place absorbs such a dense story, it doesn't return to being ordinary, it just learns to hide. The residents who came after the Lutzes were few and temporary. Each of them said the same thing when asked by reporters. Nothing unusual. It was what people expected to hear. But there were signs of discomfort, sudden moves. Houses don't change owners that often without a reason. And over time, the pattern repeated. No one stayed there for more than a few years. Some less than a few months. Journalists who tried to interview these residents noticed something else. No one wanted to speak inside the house. The interviews took place on the porch, in the yard, sometimes outside the gate. It was as if crossing the doorway reopened a chapter everyone preferred to keep buried. A dense silence surrounded the place. It wasn't the natural silence of a quiet neighborhood. It was something else. A silence that listens. Pets also seemed to sense something. Dogs barked for no reason. Cats avoided certain rooms. Some families reported that their pets became restless at night, staring at empty corners of the house. Others simply fell ill shortly after the move. Coincidences? Maybe. But how many are needed before they stop seeming casual? Strange dreams also became a constant. People reported waking up in the middle of the night, always at the same time. Dreams with hooded figures. Voices calling out names no one recognized. A woman who lived in the house for a few months said her young son began drawing the same symbol over and over again, not knowing where it came from. When they showed the drawing to a scholar of symbolism, he associated it with the idea of spiritual portals. The child was only 4 years old, and yet no one spoke openly. It was as if there were an invisible pact among those who had lived there, a pact of silence, not out of respect but out of fear. Fear of bringing back whatever seemed to be sleeping. Because in Amityville, the more it is spoken about, the more things begin to stir. And time hasn't erased the traces. Some say that, at night, the lights in the house flicker on their own. Others report seeing shadows moving behind the curtains. But no one confirms. No one denies. They just steer away from the subject, with that look of someone who knows but would rather forget. And the house remains there, solid, unmoved, as if waiting for the next person to try to unravel it. Over time, the mystery stopped being about what happened and became about what is still happening. Because the feeling, even for those who've never been there, is that Amityville hasn't finished its story. It has only paused it. And if the house seems quiet today, maybe it's not because it's at peace. Maybe it's because it's waiting. For a long time, It was believed that everything about Amityville came down to the house. The walls, the rooms, the dark hallways, as if evil were trapped in the wood and bricks. But as the years passed, a new idea began to surface. What if the curse wasn't confined to the property? What if it extended beyond the house, touching those who dared to tell its story? With the success of the books and the first film, Hollywood turned the tragedy into a franchise. The name Amityville became synonymous with horror. But behind the scenes rarely got as much attention as the box office. And it was precisely behind the scenes that the rumors began. Accidents during filming, health problems among actors, equipment repeatedly failing during specific scenes. Was it all coincidence? Or was the real story reaching out its arms? James Brolin, who played George Lutz in the original film, said in an interview that he only accepted the role after something strange happened in his own home. While reading the script, a pair of pants that had been hanging suddenly fell to the floor without explanation. He froze. He said he felt something watching him. Other crew members reported vivid dreams, nightmares involving the house, and even voices on set, voices that weren't in the script. Even those who didn't believe in the spiritual side began to feel uncomfortable with the repetition of incidents. An electrician suffered a serious fall shortly after making jokes about the case. A camera operator had a nervous breakdown during the filming of one of the most intense scenes. None of this was included in the behind-the-scenes features. No one wanted the production itself to become a new chapter of the cursed story. Then came the most subtle, yet perhaps most unsettling detail, the emotional instability of those who became too deeply involved with the story. Screenwriters who delved into the original records said they experienced insomnia, anxiety, and a constant sensation of being followed. Not in the streets, but in their thoughts, as if the story came alive inside them, as if telling too much of Amityville was also opening doors. Even those indirectly connected to the story, producers and distributors, faced lawsuits, bankruptcies, inexplicable disagreements. It was as if something in the roots of the tale resisted any attempt to make it ordinary. Every time someone tried to soften or distort what the Lutzes had reported, something went wrong. And that only strengthened a suspicion that had lingered from the beginning. The problem was never just the house. The Warrens believed this, that the house was not merely a cursed location, but a point of contact. A channel through which something manifested. And once opened, that channel could reach anyone who got too close. Maybe not violently, but slowly, invasively, silently. Today, speaking of Amityville is not just revisiting a supernatural case. It's stepping into a realm where reality and myth intertwine. Where every new documentary, every new film, seems to feed something. And maybe that is the true power of the story, to stay alive even after all those involved are gone. Because if the evil were only in the house, closing it would be enough. But if it lives in those who touch it, who in fact is safe. The story of Amityville goes far beyond what the movies showed. It begins with a crime that defies logic, follows a family destroyed by something they couldn't name, draws in the greatest paranormal investigators of the century, and withstands decades of attempts to disprove it. All of this while maintaining a silent, but relentless, pattern. No one comes out the same after crossing paths with it. It's not just a house. It's not just a case. It's a living narrative, one that seems to shape those who dare to walk its path. What began as a massacre became an echo that never stopped. An echo that haunts those who lived there, those who investigated, those who filmed, those who watched. An echo that, to this day, still reverberates. This story is just one piece, and one day, you may see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.